Just a word about the format this morning. About 3 weeks ago, Neva was the superintendent and presented a portion of an interview that Dr. James Tour, this famous organic chemist, who now has a faith science podcast where he interviews, almost every week there's another one online, some world-famous scientist who has become a believer in Jesus Christ. And some of you were here. That was fascinating because this man that Neva played a little bit from his story, it was a 20-year walk for him from being an atheist evolutionist until he became a full believer and lover of Jesus Christ. Fascinating story. I was so fascinated with it that I put together a lecture, a presentation, I guess you could call it. And that following Sabbath, we were on the west side holding a class in a large church over there, and so I presented that. And I've been asking the Lord for a week or two if it's appropriate to have a scientific lecture at church. And when Neva found out what I was going to do, she said, "Why don't you cancel that and we'll have a Thanksgiving thing for church?" So we decided the compromise would we do both. Now the purpose here, folks, is this. There are probably none of you in this room that are evolutionists or at least atheists. There are some people who believe that God started the thing and then evolution made it happen. I think that's a step in the right direction. But I would like to have our people become more informed and more knowledgeable about what the scientific community understands and how it is more and more becoming clear that there had to be a designer and a builder, if you will, a creator. And so this topic that came up 3 weeks ago called genetic entropy, I want to deal with this. Now, I don't want to insult your intelligence. I plan to teach this on a 7th grade level. Listen, my 7th grade granddaughter, it is blowing me away what this girl is coming home with in her knowledge of the human genome. That's the genetic ladder, if you will, that's in all of our cells. So I know that some of you are going to still say, "Oh, it just went right over my head." I'm tempted to have you raise your right hand and repeat after me that I will try very hard not to let that happen. So work hard with me. Very few of these words that I'm going to use are not familiar with you, that they are familiar, but when we start putting them together and describing things, I know it's a little bit easy to get lost. But let's pray that God will help, and all of us 7th graders from the past will be able to grasp what's going on. I will put this on the screen. I bumped into this in worship this week, Ellen White's encouragement for us to be tuned into more difficult thinking. There was in Christ's words that which lifted his hearers to a high plane of thought and action. If these words instead of the words of men were given to the learner today, we would see evidences of higher intelligence and a clearer comprehension of heavenly things, a deeper knowledge of God, and a purer, more vigorous Christian life. So that's my encouragement for you to put every effort you can in concentrating on my feeble effort to make some things interesting and plain. This is a drawing of a cell. And very, very simplified, this is tiny, you all know that. You would have to stack up 25 of these in a pile. And then with a bright light on a perfectly white sheet of paper, you would see the smallest speck you've ever seen. That's how tiny these are. And in this cell, there's a ball in the middle called the nucleus. And inside the nucleus is our genetic material. Let me show you a picture you're a little more familiar with probably. This thing in the middle of the screen is a chromosome. It is actually two copies. There's a copy from mom and a copy from dad that are almost exactly the same. In fact, in this room, every one of us have a genetic material that's well over 99% exactly the same. Little bits here and there are different, and the scientists of the world can use that to identify people. But these 23 X-shaped things called chromosomes that make up this ladder come a copy from mom and dad. So we have a double copy in every cell of your body, except, and I'll not say it anymore this morning, except red blood cells. They're always an exception. So every cell in your body, you probably have 70 trillion cells in your body. Every one of them, except, has all this genetic material in it. Now, in 2006, Newsweek published an entire edition on this topic. If all of you had read that back then, we wouldn't need to have this discussion today if we could have remembered it. And right down the middle is this ladder. I'm going to call it a ladder from now on. I think almost everybody in this room is familiar with this, but if you're not, you're about to be familiar that our genetic material is like a ladder, and it's as though somebody grabbed the top and the bottom and twisted them in opposite directions. So you get this thing called the double helix. How many are familiar with that? Can I see your hands? All right, most everybody. But you're all familiar with it now, correct? And you can see the artist drew this thing. I'm going to point to this winding thing. One side of the ladder and the other side of the ladder winds. And down the middle are the rungs. By the way, this is an amazing ladder. The ladder in my garage and yours has about 10 or 20 rungs. This ladder has 3 billion rungs. A lot. And this ladder was discovered by two scientists in 1953 that got the Nobel Prize. And that is our DNA. You all know that term, I think. This is where the genes are. The gene, every gene is actually a portion of the ladder. Big, long ladder, and starting here and ending there is a gene. So there's a certain number of rungs. That's the gene. Are y'all with me on that? That's pretty simple, isn't it? And scientists have studied that. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And the reason that granddaughter looks a lot like grandma is because even that little portion that's different for everybody is quite similar for granddaughter and grandmother. Now, here's an artist trying to help us understand it a little better. I think this is useful. I think you can see the double helix and the rungs in the ladder. And the artist has painted the rungs with colors. What do you notice about each of the rungs? They're actually made, if you will, of 2 half rungs. Y'all with me? And the artist has colored them. They're not colored. The artist has done that for clarification. And he's actually, or she's actually, I don't know the gender of the artist, but the artist has indicated that a yellow can hook with a green. And they've done that by making the shape of the end the same as the shape sort of the other one. Y'all with me on that? That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but in reality there's chemistry, something like that. And the artist has also tried to show that the blue could hook to a red. So the rungs of the ladder are actually made, each of them, by 2 half rungs. Everybody with me? All right. You never do this in church. I would actually be comfortable with your raising your hand and saying, I didn't understand that. And I'm actually very comfortable with that. So the idea is that always a yellow rung, half rung, will be hooked to what? A green half rung, just like you see here. And the A and the T are actually the first letter in the name of the chemical that is the half rung. So every half rung is a chemical. And scientists name all chemicals, don't they? We won't bother you with the name, but the letter, the A, is the first letter of the chemical name for the yellow half rung, if you will, and the T. So what you have is T's are always hooked to A's, and C's are always hooked to G's. Here's another example. See the red one hooked to the blue one? And that's the way the rungs in the ladder work. However, for various reasons, there are times when the rungs are wrong. The yellow ends up being hooked to a blue. Are y'all with me on this? We have a word for this. It's called a mutation. You all know that word. I hope you'll be with me now and understand that there are mutations in our DNA ladder. Are y'all with me on this? And it's very, very interesting world out there. Many times the mutations don't make any difference, which is really good. There are some mutations that just one rung out of those 3 billion can make somebody very, very sick if it's the wrong half rung. Just one. It's remarkable. And I'll show you an example of that. Now, so what is a gene? You might have to ask 100 people on the street before somebody would actually know the answer. Now, I'm going to use the scientific term and then I'll explain it. The answer is, well, the second one will be more scientific. It's a portion or a piece of the ladder. Y'all with me on that? What does a gene do? This would be the question that you would have a hard time finding anybody that really knew the answer. The correct answer, using a scientific term, is that the gene codes for a certain protein. A simpler way to say that is, the gene, if you will, is a pattern that the cell uses to make a certain protein. Let me give you just a quick little insight into something quite fascinating. Everybody eats protein. Whether you eat plants or animals, they all have protein. And there's something I would like you to know about proteins. Proteins are able to do a certain job because of their shape. It's a little bit like a key. When you stick a key into a lock and try to turn it, if you can't turn it, it's because the shape wasn't quite right. Is that correct? If it does work, it's because the mountains and the valleys were the right shape. And proteins are like that. They work, they're able to do a job because of their shape. And every cell in your body, all 70 trillion of them except, have, listen to this, hundreds of millions of proteins in them that do various jobs in the cell, or the cell would instantly die. Where do those proteins come from? You don't eat them and use them. I said to you, proteins work because, everybody say it, work because of their shape. Let's try it again. Proteins work because of their shape. And when that protein gets into your tummy, that shape is unwound into a long string, like a chain, if you will. So it no longer has the shape that it needed to do whatever job it was supposed to do. Is that clear? Everybody with me? Then that string, here's a new word, you all know this word, that string of amino acids hooked together like a chain, sort of, that travels into the small intestine where enzymes cut apart every one of those amino acids. How many know the word amino acid? Can I see your hands? Everybody raise your hands. Now, you couldn't tell what it is, but you've heard the word. It's a very simple little chemical. You know the names of them. There's only 20 of them that we use. The plants make more than that, but we only use 20 of them. Lysine. Who hasn't heard of lysine? That's the name of one of the 20 amino acids. I won't even give you more names, but some of you would know names of. You can buy bottles of them at the health food store, all 20 of them. And people will tell you you should take them. It's not true. Just eat some more food and you'll get plenty of them. Are you all with me on that? That's free. That wasn't in the notes. So the gene, folks, which starts somewhere in the ladder and ends somewhere else, are you all with me, has the information, watch this point now, for the cell to make whatever protein it needs. You don't use any proteins you eat as such. You cut them up, and your cells take the pieces and make the proteins that the cells need. Are y'all with me on that? Okay. That's what a gene does. Question. Where do we get certain proteins we need? I answered that question. Our cells, I didn't tell you this part. I inferred it. Our cells, every cell in your body has thousands of factories to make proteins that you need for that cell to function. Most of those proteins are kept inside the cell to do these jobs, all kinds of jobs to make that cell alive and function and live. Some of the protein is sent outside of the cell. I'll give you one interesting example. All of you know the idea. You probably haven't thought about where it came from. But insulin is a protein, and it is manufactured inside certain cells in the pancreas. And then that protein is taken out of the cell and gets into the bloodstream, and most everybody has some idea of how insulin helps control the blood sugar. So that's how we get the proteins we need in terms of the fact of what to make the cells work. Don't we get proteins we need by eating them? I mentioned this. Not exactly. Our own cells build the ones we need from the amino acids which are made available by digesting the protein we eat. Does that sound familiar from what I just said a few minutes ago? All right? They build them. It's a fascinating thing. I'm going to show you an actual video of it happening. How many rungs are in our DNA? I said 3 billion. It's actually 3,200,000,000. Is that a lot or not? Astonishing. This ladder, if you will, that's in our cells. Okay. I'm going to show you this protein probably 6 times in the next few minutes. This is just one of hundreds of thousands of proteins that our bodies make, but I'm going to use it as an example. Does it look rather complex? Is it folded up into a certain shape? Please say yes to me. Does the shape look pretty complex? Say yes. Every little twist and turn, where it's a line, this is just a simple chain of amino acids, but the very turns, the very shape, the very corners, all of that is critical. You get just one amino acid in the wrong spot, and it won't have that shape, and this thing won't work. And then you try to make a coil. Can you see the coil? That's rows and rows and rows and rows of amino acids hooked together in such a way that you get that coil. It's astonishing, folks. This stuff never could have happened by chance. And just to underline this, how many amino acids are in this protein? Almost 2,000. Is that correct? So when and your cell makes these every second, your cell is making about 1,000 more of this very one. And the first way it's manufactured is, and I'll show you this picture of this video, it's manufactured as a chain of amino acids. It can't do anything because it doesn't have a, come on you guys, It can't do something because it has no, correct. So it goes to another factory. First, there's a factory that makes the long chain of 1,800 amino acids in the right order and the right ones. And then it goes to another factory where it's folded up into a shape that you see on the screen. Are you all with me on this? Are we all clear? How many have I lost? Let me see your hands. Who should have raised their hand and didn't? All right. He wants to know the name of the factory. I'll tell you in a minute. Now watch this, folks. In order to code for this protein, the gene, y'all with me, that has to be there so the factory can make this protein has 181,000 rungs. Or twice that many half rungs, correct? And they all have to be the right ones, or this thing won't work. Amazing. Now, this gene has been given a name. The BR comes from the word breast and CA from cancer. Americans have been taught that this is the cancer gene. It's a poor idea because everybody has this gene. In fact, we have 2 copies of it. Why is that? One from mom, one from dad. And what people actually may not understand, but what technically is meant, if that gene has some mistakes in it, then you're more likely to get breast cancer. Y'all with me on that? So they call it the cancer gene. I hate this world in the medical community where they dumb things down to people and say, oh, you have the cancer gene. Everybody has those genes. But the problem is, what mutations are there? And just for the sake of interest, I didn't know who in the world Angelina Jolie was. I don't go to movies. But I found out because she found out that she had enough mutations in both the gene from dad and mom that her chance was 87% that she would get breast cancer. You understand the idea? And I'm not telling you why yet. I'm going to tell you what the connection is to getting the cancer. But yes, in fact, since you asked, this BRCA1, we finally found another one, so we have to say BRCA1 and BRCA2. I don't know why they used my name with that. I don't get that. In the beginning, we thought that the BRCA1 gene had to do with all female reproductive organ cancers, which is correct. We also now have learned that it has to do with all male reproductive organ cancers, and so on. But so there's a gene then that codes for the BRCA protein, which you see on your screen. Okay. Marvelous stuff here, folks. And if I could make it in 3 dimensions, it would make you even more awestruck at the incredible complexity of just one protein out of hundreds of thousands that the cell has to have to live, to function. Here's the same drawing. Can you see at the end of that yellow arrow a little kind of orangish ball? Another drawing would be, somebody else drew can you see the little black dot at the end of the arrow? And those black dots, or that little orange ball, are the factories that make the proteins in your cell. Do you see lots of black dots on this screen? Every cell has thousands of protein manufacturing factories that use the amino acids that came from the digestive system to build whatever protein you need, when and where you need it. Are y'all with me on that? 7th grade stuff, right? What grade is she in? 7th and 4th. 4th grade too, right, sweetheart? She's smiling. She won't say. They do have a name. I don't like to throw out words that you're not familiar with, but the name of the factory where the protein is manufactured is called a ribosome. Okay. Would you agree with me that these 2 words have the same letters? What is it that makes me be able to call one a different word than the other? Watch this. This is the correct answer. It is the order of the letters. Now, scientists like to use fancy words. It makes us think they're smart. They'll say it's the sequence. All right? Y'all with me on that? So, scientists recognized that they needed to know, follow me, the sequence of the rungs in the DNA. Y'all with me on this? And you could say the order of them. Finding the sequence, or finding the order of the 3 billion letters is called what? Sequencing the human genome. Have you had enough background to understand what I'm talking about when I say the human genome has been sequenced? All right? I'll show you a fascinating picture in just a moment about that. But the man who was in charge of that program, Francis Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, arranged to have $2 billion, and it took them 10 years to sequence the human genome. Today, you can get your genome sequenced for a few $100s or less. I heard an advertisement 2 days ago. There's a company, in fact, Jim Tour is part of this, who plan to sequence the whole genome for $100 and have it done in 1 hour. How long did it take it to do the first time? 10 years. That's a good question. Did you hear it? Because if I know the proper sequence and I find somebody else's gene that is not right, I might be able to tell them that they're going to have a disease that we could prevent if we did something. And something nobody should ever try to do, but people in China are trying it. You get an egg that's been fertilized, and you find out that there's some mistakes in the DNA, and you'd like to go in there and fix them. And you can, or I should say it can be done. We can do that. The problem is we sometimes make mistakes. And you could have a horrible situation with a child that was just so disformed or whatever. So everybody in the world except the Chinese people, and it's their leaders, it's the problem, of course, are saying, don't go there. Now this, I could take 20 minutes to tell you about this man. I'm not going to do it. But up above his forehead there are 10 books. He has the 10th one open. And I'm going to show you a close-up of what he's pointing to. Can you see from where you're sitting what's on the screen? A's and T's and G's and C's. Are y'all with me? How many A's and T's and G's and C's are in those 10 books, would you guess? 3,200,000,000. That's the result of sequencing the human genome. Y'all with me on this? You can get this online. It's free for you, you know, after they spent the money to get it. All right. Now I'm going to show you the movie of how the factory builds a protein. Before I do that, I want to familiarize you just a little bit with this idea. I'm going to call this thing a truck. And I've drawn that circle because at the end is something the truck is carrying. What is the truck carrying? An amino acid. How many different kinds of amino acids are there that we use? 20, and this is one of them. And the idea is that on the nose of this truck are 3 half rungs. Y'all with me? That correspond only to that amino acid. It'll make more sense in a moment. And up here is a copy of one side of the ladder. So there's a bunch of half rungs. You got it? And here's the idea behind this whole thing. The 3 half rungs on the nose, I said this, correspond to a single amino acid and none other. This is how the body is able to assemble the chains in the right order. So here is the half rung, and I'll just show you in a moment how this works with this video. We're now inside the cell. This thing is magnified 21 million times. And we're heading toward the nucleus, inside which is the DNA. Are y'all with me on that? Everybody? Neva has a question. Bless her heart. Oh, yes, please, for this video, let's turn the lights out, if you would be kind enough. And I think you could turn them all out. It would be fine with me. Thank you, dear. It's much clearer on my screen than it is there. All right. So we're heading for the nucleus, which has these pores or holes where things can go in and out. And as we get into almost inside, can you see the twisted ladder? Everybody? That's the ladder we've been talking about, correct? And instead of cutting a piece of the ladder and taking it to the factory for a pattern, what happens is there is a special protein that the cell manufactures that can split the ladder, if you will, down the middle. And so you'll see it momentarily coming along, splitting the ladder. Can you see that? It's breaking the half rungs. Are y'all with me on this? And a moment later, another protein comes along and builds a half ladder against one side. Watch it. And you understand that this process is being done with a gene that starts here and ends there. Are y'all with me on that? And instead of taking an actual piece of the DNA to the factory, it's making a copy on one side of the ladder to take to the factory to build a certain protein. Doesn't matter. Good question. And watch this. So it's carried out through the cell, through the nucleus, and there's a sentinel. Watch the sentinel decide whether there's permission or not. See? Got it? Then this is carried by a truck on a highway that they don't show. These were created by Harvard. Here it comes out of the nucleus. I hope you got this, folks. That chunk, which looks green on my screen, is the length of the gene, if you will, one side of the ladder. You got that? And it is taken to the protein manufacturing factory, get this now, which itself is protein. And you can't have proteins unless you have a factory to make them. But the factory is made out of proteins, so what are you stuck with? Somebody had to make it to begin with. Is that correct? By the way, for what it's worth, these protein manufactories are themselves manufactured inside the nucleus in another special compartment, but we won't go there. So now that the pattern, if you will, is there, the other part of the factory is put in place, and the construction starts. And this goes at blinding speeds. But watch. Down here. This is a chain, a growing chain of amino acids. All right? Now let's take a look at it from the outside of the factory. And one more time, let me just ask you, what's this thing up here? That's the half ladder. What's this thing here? That's the chain of amino acids. And once it's manufactured, and as I say, this goes with blinding speed, it's astonishing. That chain of amino acids is now carried to another factory. It's the folding factory. And inside the folding factory are a bunch of proteins that do the folding. And since scientists have to name everything, they call those proteins inside that factory chaperones. And they don't even show them, but they do show the chain going inside the factory. And can you tell what's happening to it? It's being folded up into a certain shape so it can do a certain job. Are you all with me on this? Not bad for 7th grade, right? All right. And then they do show the next thing, although they don't show the highway. They show the little truck, and when it's finally folded up, it comes along and carries it. Once it comes out of the factory, you'll see the truck coming from the left, which will carry it to a certain place, and it can start doing its job. And just quickly, I'll tell you that it is so amazingly, folks, complex. It's just layer upon layer upon layer of complexity, and they all affect each other. And there's actually little flagmen. Here comes the truck, and there's a little protein flagman that says, turn left. And if there is a mistake, even one, it doesn't have to always be one, but if there's a mistake in the genome for that flagman, and he says turn right instead of left, you have a genetic disease. Are y'all with me on that? It's incredible. The Creator's hand. Now I'm going to pass this up. I'd love to tell you. Here's that protein. Let me tell you what this protein does now. So let's just say we just saw this manufactured. Can we have the lights back on maybe a little bit? Not maybe full, but some. Are y'all with me? Let's just say that this protein was just manufactured by the factory. Are y'all with me on that? All 2,000 rungs, or amino acids and so forth. What this does, this is so amazing, folks. This protein, it is not a living thing, folks. It is just a molecule. Pretty big molecule. It actually travels along the DNA, watch me now, watch this, and fixes the mistakes. Did you get that? When I get to heaven, I'm going to biology class. I have a question to ask. And by the way, we call the BRCA gene a tumor suppressor gene. See if you can follow this. Without exception, all cancer is the result of mutations. Do I need to repeat that? There is no exception to that. Some mutations you inherit. Some mutations happen while you live because stuff like radiation, you all know a little bit about that. And because this protein fixes the mistakes in the DNA, we call it a tumor suppressor protein. Got it? And once this was found, people were saying, this is amazing. We now know, folks, there are scores, actually hundreds of tumor suppressor proteins. My question in the heavenly class will be, sir, did you have tumor suppressor genes? You understand you have to have a gene before a protein, right? Did you have tumor suppressor genes before the fall? Why would I want to know that? You wouldn't need them until the fall. Y'all with me on the idea? In other words, were you making provision, sir, in case something happened? Now, he may say, no, I waited till the fall to do it, and that's okay with me too. I'm just interested to know. Aren't you interested too? So there's this protein now that's been made that we talked about. I'm going to quickly pass that up. And what we put on the screen 3 weeks ago, entropy, means how entropy measures disorder. And when God created Adam and Eve, there was no disorder. Probably none until the fall. Starting at the fall, people started getting mutations. And there's a very interesting picture that I'll show you in a minute. But first of all, let me quickly give you this example. This is also magnified about 20 million times. What you're looking at, I'm going to take an easier picture of it. That's hemoglobin. See that thing with the 2 blue tubes and the 2 yellow tubes? Everybody see it? Those tubes are actually proteins. They're folded up into a certain what? Shape. And I'm trying to illustrate that by putting some blue circles in there. What do you think I'm representing by those blue circles? Amino acids hooked together to make this shape. Are y'all with me? And I'm going to show you now a picture because there's, did I have it on the previous slide? No, I didn't. There's 574 amino acids in those 4 chains. I'm going to put a letter that represents each amino acid and show you a yellow chain and a blue chain in the form of the letters for the, there it is, 574 in this hemoglobin total molecule. And all those yellow letters, each one stands for an amino acid. Are y'all with me? Yeah. And they have to be in the right order, correct? The amino acids. And all the blue letters stand for the blue tube. Are y'all with me on that? So there's that yellow tube and the blue tube, and actually 2 of each. And you all know what hemoglobin does, folks. It travels around the body and picks up oxygen in the lungs and takes it to everywhere in the body, correct? Now watch this interesting thing. There are some people that have one mistake in the 6th amino acid in the blues. And that amino acid, instead of being cysteine like it's supposed to be for those people, is valine. One amino acid out of how many? And their red blood cells, instead of looking like that, from one amino acid mistake, it's actually a half rung. One half rung out of the 3 that codes for it is the wrong one, so you get the wrong amino acid. Are y'all with me on that? Instead of the red blood cell looking like this, it looks like that. We call it sickle cell disease. Isn't that amazing? One? Now, the physicians in this room, and maybe some of the other practitioners will know that you have to have that mistake from both mother and father to get sick. If you get it from just mother or father, you're considered a carrier of the disease, but you're not sick. I'm just trying to illustrate for you, folks, how precise and unbelievably complex and arranged life is for it to be. It could never have happened by evolution. All right. Astonishing. Now, I should quit, I guess. We have a very hard time finding do mutations happen by chance, by accident? Yes. We can almost never find one that makes an organism better. And here's an interesting story. Watch this, folks. This is a very important point. Even after would this make sense if I said it this way? Even after the tumor suppressor proteins do all their correcting. Are y'all with me on this? And there's a whole phalanx of them. Somebody used that word. I love that word. I don't even know what it means, but it means a lot. Even after they do all their correcting, the average number of mutations that occur in every cell of your body for each generation is 100. After all the corrections are made, there's still 100 mistakes that you have that your parents didn't have. 100 additional mutations. Plus or minus, obviously, but this is the average. And If none of the mutations were repaired, this is an amazing story, folks. The human race would only live a few months. If it wasn't for tumor suppressor genes, which code for tumor suppressor proteins, we would all be dead in about 3 or 4 months. And very sick on the way. And by the way, this is from one of the most famous geneticists in the world, which is the one that Neva played for you 3 weeks ago. Author of 6 books on genetics. This curved line, this is amazing, folks. If there is a steady rate of mutations in humankind, even with all the repair, there is a steady rate. What is it? 100 mutations per cell per generation, right? The lifespan would decrease according to this curve. This is mathematics. This is calculus. And now, obviously, I'm not even going to go there, but you get the idea. Now watch when we put on here the actual record in the Bible of how long people lived. Watch this. What do you see about the red dots and some of the black dots? They follow the curve. Watch this interesting point. There is no way that the ancients could have falsified this data to fit this curve. Y'all with me on this? They just recorded how long people lived. And it shows what's going on in the human being because of the mutations that are taking place. It's an amazing proof of the validity of the Bible. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's enough. I've said all of that already. And I was going to do some calculations for you on probabilities, but because we're out of time, we'll leave that. Now, folks, my purpose in this was to give you a tiny glimpse into things that most of you aren't aware of. Is that correct? And I realize you can't go out and explain this to somebody else, but I want you to realize that even the brightest men and women in the world who claim that these things happen by chance have no explanation for this complexity. And I'd love to just go on, but I'll stop doing that. Okay. Julie? That's correct. It will eventually. You probably didn't notice that the curve stopped at 45 years, the Roman citizen. Why are we living longer? Because of medical advances, not because we've improved the genome. But with medical advances, we can help people live in spite of some of the genetic problems there are. Yes, without the tumor suppressors, the whole race would be gone in 4 months. But there's no question. We are all doomed, except for the second coming. Well, I want to go to the Thanksgiving part, but... Yeah.
No, they won't let me have it.
Oh, when I was living in California, I used to run a creation science organization, and we had a gentleman come up from University, Cal State Long Beach, Dr. Joseph Mastropolo, and this was 15 to 20 years ago when I was there. And he had been a biochemist, biology teacher, professor. I mean, he knew his stuff. And he had been studying the genetic entropy already by that time for 30 years. And he gave a very shocking statistic that if we continue, and there's no way to stop it, if our genetic mutation rate continues at the current rate, that we won't have a baby born alive by the year 2080.
Yeah.
It's just so bad.
So there's a lot of reasons, folks, to know that we're near the end. Amen?
Amen.
And if you ever had a question about Ellen White's statement that says the final movements will be rapid ones, you shouldn't have that question anymore. we could have the mark of the beast overnight. And without legislation, how much of this stuff that's going on in this country today about COVID and what you have to do or cannot do, how much of that has been by legislation? Just about zero. Constitution doesn't matter. It's a remark.